All right, well, hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Jarman, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Assistant Curator of Exhibitions and Academic Outreach at the Wellen Museum of Art, and have had the pleasure of curating our current exhibition, Jamea Richmond-Edwards, Another World and Yet the Same. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our talk this evening. This is our continuing lecture series called Artists in Conversation, where tonight we'll hear from our featured artist, Jamea Richmond-Edwards. Very quickly before we get into the lecture, just want to offer a few thank yous, especially to the folks in the administration that support the work we do at the Wellen, and specifically Dean of Faculty Ngoni Munemo. We have a very small staff at the Wellen Museum of Art, and so when we commit to doing an exhibition project, it is truly an all hands on deck endeavor. So I just want to thank my colleagues at the Wellen Museum for giving this project your all, and especially to our Johnson Post Director, Tracy L. Adler. Without everything that you all do, very simply put, this exhibition would not have been possible. So thank you for everything that you do. And I very quickly want to just recognize that our programming at the museum, which is always free and open to the public, is made possible with monies from the William G. Roerich 34 Lecture Fund. Jamea is on campus all week here at Hamilton College to meet with classes, offer studio critiques, and deliver talks such as the one here this evening. By the time that we conclude on Friday, she will have met with students in Africana Studies, American Studies, art history, classics, literature, music, religious studies, sociology, and theater. That is emblematic of the way that we operate at the Wellen Museum as a teaching museum, meaning that we are focused on making sure that art is not just accessible to, but deeply relevant to a wide range of disciplines on the campus here at Hamilton College. And of course, it is also a testament to the dynamism, the power, and the complexity of Jamea's artwork. So here to help us unpack some of that complexity, please help me welcome artist Jamea Richmond-Edwards.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Oh. Okay, can you hear me okay?
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. This process has been really amazing. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Tracy, the Wellen team. I really want to really emphasize how amazing this journey has been, and this is the most rewarding part, the interaction with the students and the faculty. So let's get into it. So before I get into the work, oftentimes I like to contextualize like my lens and how I view the world and the machine I'm up against. And so this slide right here is a representation of the sort of, I'll say, the propaganda that I grew up in. And I was born in 1982, so I grew up in a very interesting time in American history. So we're talking about the crack epidemic, the AIDS epidemic, the war on crime, Gulf War, and there's this running joke of like us millennials are really tired because we've experienced like quite a bit of like drama, right? And I also want to talk about my understanding as a kid from like one side of pop culture or media, and one was Roots. Like we watched Roots when I was in elementary school. It was on PBS. It was a whole thing, and it was a very particular lens of American history and American slavery. So if you can imagine growing up of like we were bombarded with like AIDS, crack, and this is the 80s. So I'm from Detroit. It was extremely violent at the time. I can remember the smells of the houses burning. It's a very distinct smell that I remember. The Starving Kids in Africa, this was on every other commercial. So if you could think about this, this is quite jarring as I reflect on my childhood. It's you're in danger. I had this danger outside because with the crack epidemic, and it just really did a number on urban cities. And this is how we're contextualized. And when I mean me as a Black American, is roots, slavery, and then the connection to Africa was starving. So I say that to say, before I get into how I began liberating myself at a young age, I want to go with this quote by Sun Ra. And it says, if you are not a myth, whose reality are you? If you are not a reality, whose myth are you? So, Sunrise not of my time, but it really speaks to how Black and Indigenous artists, we began using myth as a form of liberatory work. So as I spoke to the sort of crack epidemic and the roots, this is also happening simultaneous. And what I mean by that, Detroit, we're known for hair wars. While you had the war on crimes, there was a thing called Freaknik that happened every year, that happened in Atlanta. Thriller debuted. So for me, while I have these two juxtaposing images of like my existence. One, you are a slave, you are in danger, you're starving. And then I have like Parliament. My sister is 13 years older than me. So she was a heavy househead, really into George Clinton. At the bottom, you have the new dance show. I don't have, well, yeah, so this is the new dance show. So this was like Detroit's versions of Soul Train, right? And so keep in mind, my mother is a dancer, my sister is a househead. So I looked at this in terms of, and obviously as a young kid, I didn't have the language to articulate it as such, but I'm like, I identified with this. In 1999, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill came out. So I'm like, oh, I'm more so Lauryn Hill. So fine art or pop culture, particularly in the Black arts, is where I found my voice. So expounding on myth making and storytelling, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker came out in, I believe, 88, 87, I can't remember. And I remember being like really obsessed with that. And Michael Jackson is obviously one of like America's greatest, and also one of America's hated because he had a rough patch. But Moonwalker was, I just remember being obsessed with it and just really inspired by it. You know what I mean? Like watching it repeatedly. And as I reflect back on it, I haven't watched it in a really long time. Excuse me. But I remember that having a great impact on me. Fast forward to another one of America's greatest, but also very convoluted individual, Kanye West. I started graduate school at Howard University in 2010. This is when My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy came out. And I remember Kanye West had a visual album to accompany the actual album. And I just remember like just being obsessed with it. Like I literally could not believe it. And what I remember as it came out, I'm like, the last time something to this level impacted me was Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. So, so this was a very defining moment for me. And if you look at my work, like you can see some of the imagery in my work from this album. All right, so looking into my work, and I'm going to kind of skate, kind of rush through this to get into like the meat of my show that's currently up. So as you can see, I created this in 2022, And my work, you see that I'm beginning to use mixed media. This is a body of work that I created in 22 called Currency, where I began sort of unpacking my relationship to currency. Like, what is currency? Is it the USD? Is it imagination? Is it the ideas? And I sort of began foreseeing some of the challenges that I'm having today back in 2022. And so I created this body of work, but as you can see in it, I'm beginning to inch into this idea of storytelling. This is the first time that I'm using a glitter glove and I'm bringing actual animals into the work. And I'm just going to jump in 2024, Gondwana. And FYI, Gondwana was the name of the geography of the planet before it broke apart. So, not a little bit past Pangea, right? And I'll get into it, but as you can see, I'm really into research and history and trying to understand America and really the world at large. And just to give you an idea of how I think about things, when you explore history, you can always follow the corn. Corn is a very interesting crop and its origins are really mysterious, but you can tell the people, it's particularly Black Indigenous Americans, from their relationship to corn. And you have this circle here. This is a bowl of Flamin' Hot Cheetos because, so you have the corn, the Indian corn over here, and the Flamin' Hot Cheetos, and the girls center, front and center. This piece is featured in the current show about Atlantic Canaan Land. I'll just give you a quick spiel. Detroit was the last stop on the Underground Railroad. And I didn't know that growing up. I recently discovered that like within the past like 5 to 6 years. But the code word for Canada was Canaan Land. And just to give you an idea of how I'm thinking about storytelling from a painting standpoint, like catching a good story in one frame. The figure is in a cloud, so it suggests that she is a giant. So that's first and foremost. And so as I began unpacking this notion of freedom, what does that mean? That means that I'm going to adorn myself in my finest. I'm going to have my crown, I'm going to have my fur coat on, and I have my pendant, my Cartier pendant that I jokingly talk about I can't afford it, but in this painting I can afford it, right? So it's just really speak. And this is when when I created this painting where that free will thing popped up where it's like, oh, I can paint myself in the places I want to be or go or how I want to adorn my body, right? Dark Night of the Soul, I created this in 2023. This is an 8 foot by 30 foot scale painting. And as you see, I'm beginning to work through like this idea of storytelling. And from here, I'm interested in a cosmos. So this is me kind of like scratching the surface of that. March of the Nagas, again, storytelling. So I began really, and just really quite frankly, just interested in the N-word, and what it's related to, and really studying etymology and words that are similar to that. So phonetics I find quite interesting. So you have Negus, if you look it up, it's it means the Ethiopian nobility. You have Nagas, which is the serpentine gods who created mankind, and then you have niggas. And I began really really unpacking that. And I'm a millennial, I'm a hip hop kid. And it dawned on me, like I need to begin having real conversations about what it is to be a millennial, what it means to grow up in hip hop and be able to contextualize that. Because it's a lot of what's the word? Discourse around just the word N-word, the N-word. And it's like actually this word has been in our vocabulary for a really long time, and it shifts. So I'm just giving you an idea of how my brain works, right? In terms of this idea of storytelling, Lullaby for Shooting Star. I created this in 23. And this is a conversation about Tecumseh, who was in the Midwestern region from Ohio and ended up having the Battle of Detroit. And when I relocated back to Detroit in 21, Tecumseh, his spirit kind of let's say inspired me, right? And so Lullaby for Shooting Star, in terms of how I think about it, is this is like a call and response. So this is me calling, and this is the spirit of Tecumseh, hence his hands rising from the water. So I think very like metaphorically, and figure out like how do I tell these stories. All right, so I'm gonna just do a quick snippet. Another note that I just want to say, my whole life, I've studied art literally since I was a toddler. I've done art my whole life, but I'm also a musician. So I started on clarinet at age 9 and shifted into French horn, which essentially led me to a scholarship at Jackson State University studying music. And so by the time I got to Jackson State in Mississippi, I was part of marching band, and I discovered that HBCU marching bands is like a whole world in itself. And by the time I got there, I realized that I'm part of this like very rich ancient legacy. Okay. And I could tell that it was just how serious people took it, right? And so a lot of times when I'm thinking about art and figures and subjects, I'm thinking it from that music processional band lens. And so I'm just gonna play 30 seconds of it. This short film is also included in the exhibition. Every time I do a body of work, I'm thinking of what it sounds like. So I really want it to be a free, immersive experience. And what's happened over the years is the work is literally
They say space is the place. Close your eyes and look around and ask your.
You can see more of that in the actual exhibition. So again, just like really unpacking how I'm thinking about the work. She emerged from the dust of Titans. This is one of my favorite paintings, but I just want to note, see that little UFO right there behind the clouds? Okay. So if you look at my work, you find the orbs and UFOs are very similar. Just for context, I had my first familial, the full family had a UFO encounter in 2020. It was 6 UFOs circling myself, my 2 sons, and my goddaughters, and my nephew for 4 hours. And I was never the same afterwards. So I am one of those people, and I began incorporating that experience into my work. This piece is really important. The Fire Next Time I created in 2022, which is the biblical reference in terms of what we will experience next time. Prior, we had the flood, the great flood, and the Bible says that it will be the fire next time. And I was really inspired by that, excuse me. And as you see, this is my husband, this is me. This is my youngest son, and we just chilling like, oh, okay, the fire next time. So let's put a pin into this painting right here, because it'll circle back to this current body of work. It's on the mountaintop. This is me painting about the UFO experience that we had, but instead of making it in Silver Spring, Maryland, I placed it on top of Stone Mountain in Georgia. So this is me. So one of the things that you see throughout the work, my sense of storytelling is getting better, right? I'm getting more flamboyant, and I'm using my imagination. I didn't see these characters, like these aliens or whatever you want to call it. But I'm like, that's the beauty about storytelling and myth making. I can create whatever I want. Right? So, Holy Wars, another painting that I did, getting into the storytelling. All right, we're gonna fast forward. So 2024 is when I made a decision, like the full decision on what I was going to make this body of work about, another world and yet the same. And I'm just gonna break down what inspired me. So first and foremost, I forgot to put his name. This is my good friend Mario Moore, who is a Detroit-based artist. And I visited his studio and he was creating this painting called Pillars of the Frontier, which featured his wife, his sister, his mother, and his grandmothers. And I was really taken back by this painting because I'm like, wait, this is a winter time. And I was like, wait, I studied art my whole life and I haven't quite seen many like wintry scenes with brown folks in it. You know what I mean? Like it's very rare. And they were just really unbothered in it. And I was really inspired. So from there, that's when I went down the rabbit hole, right? And so I discovered that we had what is called a little ice age. So the little ice age was a period of cooler temperatures and increased climate change from roughly 1300 to 1850. Never knew about that, right? And then I discovered that part of this ice age happened because so many indigenous people were slaughtered during this time frame that it literally cooled off the planet. So keep in mind, I'm just relocating from Maryland to Detroit, to my hometown of Detroit in 2021. So I left Detroit in 2000, returned in 21. So I began like really grappling with the cold. Like the cold was very jarring for me, for my body. I was getting sick. I just couldn't quite wrap my head around the cold. And so I began researching it and exploring it to help understand it. So my friend Mario, he really helped me like feel at ease. Then I discovered, this is Rosa Parks, by the way, in her fur coat. So what's really unique about Detroit is we know, it gets really cold. So in the wintertime, people are really adorned in their mink and their fur coats, which being in the DMV area for 15 years, it was a bit taboo to wear fur. You don't know if the PETA people gonna get you if you wear which, I understand. But in Detroit, that just didn't exist. And Mario had this image of Rosa Parks. And I'm like, oh, that's really inspiring, right? And then I discovered, just unpacking the code, I discovered the sweat hypothesis that, which suggests that the southwestern United States and East Antarctica was connected at some point. So I'm like, holy crap. And this was a hypothesis that was actually, like they have the evidence. So I don't know if it's a hypothesis anymore, if they have the full like evidence to support this information. So I'm just floored at the code. So like, okay, so now let's get into it. Now I'm ready to dig into the narrative of Another World and Yet the Same, of this character who I invented called Ice Cold. This is just a spiel of the show, which essentially follows the protagonist, Ice Cold, who convinces, Iceberg, who convinces his family to travel to Antarctica. And I put alpha right here because before this wasn't included in the exhibition, but I began sort of unpacking like what this story would be. And this is Iceberg, and I have him as being like really ice cold. And I created this in 2024 before I began anything to kind of really work through who this young brother was. And it's what's interesting about the word ice cold, I'm thinking of like physically cold, but then I'm thinking about I'm also thinking about like just being out cold, like being brave, like you know what I mean? I was even inspired by Iceberg Slim, who was an author and former pimp, and in Chicago. And so I was just thinking about like, okay, what does it mean to be cold? This painting is, this figure right here was a Prester John that I included in it, who is a very interesting character that you find throughout history. That throughout this research that I'm digging in terms of Antarctica, that suggests that this mythological character by the name of Prester is waiting in Antarctica. So, you know, this was the origins of that. So I created, that was the first piece, and then the second piece, I said the Omega, I created the beginning of the story and the end of the story before I jumped into the actual body of work. And this piece isn't included in the show, but it's called Terra Sancta, which means Holy Land. And I discovered as I'm looking at these older maps that Antarctica was also called like Australia at some point. You know what I mean? Like it's some really great like just really good information that I'm discovering. And in certain maps it was written as being the Holy Land. So what I envisioned is, oh, okay, so if this character ice cold has to reach, you know, this Holy Land or this Antarctica, then I'm gonna be there waiting. I have to put myself at the beginning of the story and at the end of the story, and this is me standing next to the Prester John. As you see, so what's really cool about like the things that I'm looking at, like archival information, I'm looking at like, I look at the TikTok conspiracy videos. And what's really cool about those is, you know, get into some of the conspiracy or mythos that's related to Antarctica. Like there's giants and gargoyles and all these creatures that are there. And I'm like, okay, that's perfect for world building and myth making. So I place it in there, right? If you look at the details in my work, this is like the people landing and arriving, and you know, this is me kind of like just really happy. All right, so let's get into the actual work in terms of how I built these paintings for another world and yet the same. So what I discovered very early on after I made those two pieces is that all the subjects in my paintings are going to be family members and people I know. So this is my niece, Diamond, and this is DJ, my cousin. So how the process works is I know who the characters are going to be. So what are they going to be? What are they doing? And just for context, I don't sketch anything out. So like ideas roll out, and then I'm like, okay, well let's build this up. So I knew that these two, that Diamond and DJ, would be Banner Girls. And just to give you context of the Banner Girls, from when you think in terms of marching bands, the idea of marching bands in a contemporary lens is very like it's contemporary, but we don't typically look at it in relationship to what they served, and they were typically, you know, part of military. And the people who hold the banners, this is a very important job. You know, it's very risky. You're showing your status. And so I'm like, okay, if for this story of Iceberg and him and his family going on this procession, I need some banner girls. And at the time, I'm like really obsessed. This is Serpent Mound, which is in Ohio, which is one of the largest earthworks here, I think, in the world. And it's a huge serpent. You know, no one knows like the purpose is served, but I've been working with serpents the past, I'll say 6 or 7 years. And so as I'm thinking about this painting that I'm doing, I'm just showing you how like I'm piecing it together. So that painting, so those ideas transforms into this. And this is trying to get that part. Okay. The way. So for the banner, you know, I have to make a decision of what is the banner they're going to hold. And while at this moment, I'm really realizing that, yes, this this Antarctica is about this trip for iceberg, but it really represents something else, which is a metaphor for myself. Because for one, at this point, as I'm making this body of work, it's physically, literally cold. And the joke that I like to say, I don't know if it's a joke, it's surreal. Because of everything that's been happening in the world, I said I have a really cold heart, like this, my cold millennial heart. And Antarctica is really a metaphor for the coldness that I feel. So when I'm thinking in terms of the way is also this idea of like one liberation. And if you ever want to research the way and go in a rabbit hole, it has many esoteric and biblical references that could be a whole lecture in itself. But as I'm thinking about this procession and these two women in my life leading it, I'm thinking in terms of like framing this story. And if this is a musical, because I have a music background, what would it be? And so I have this dancer here that's kind of like, like framing this idea. And then I want to point to the most important part of this painting is the serpent liberating bringing the bird. And as you can see, the serpent wraps around the whole, it frames the canvas. I'm literally thinking about Serpent Mound in my mind. And so the painting I'm looking at it from a multitude of perspectives. I'm looking at the painting as geography. There's a labyrinth in the center. I've never thought about labyrinths, but as my work, I call it like channeling. And it was very indicative of like the sort of journey this is. And for those of you who aren't familiar, but labyrinths they pop up in history in very interesting times. And for me, as I'm like grappling through my own adversity and struggles as with my own humanity, I'm thinking about like overcoming this journey, this labyrinth that I created. And so move on to the next painting. So I'm going to set up my next painting. So for my painting called The Mothership, so how it works is I know that, okay, I have to create this painting. So who are the characters in this next piece that I'm doing? And to your right, I'm building up the characters. So we have Zende Rod, my youngest son. We have Jeremiah, my eldest. We have Malachi, my grandnephew. My nephew Farad, my niece Naima. Oh, she's being covered. Okay. And Yakalo, who is Iceberg. So how the process starts is I know that these are the characters within the work, right? So, okay, so where are we going with this? Right as I'm understanding, I'm thinking about Antarctica. So now I'm looking at like both conspiracy theory and like CIA documents, all these documents related to Antarctica. And I'm like, okay, like where is this taking me? And the really great part about it is it has a lot of conversation about like aliens being there. So as I'm thinking about this journey that Iceberg is going on, in the back of my mind, I'm like, there could be aliens that they encounter, right? So as I'm thinking about aliens, it's kind of like ideas come to mind and I don't even know how they come, right? And so this idea of the Battle of LA comes up. Mystery air objects seen in the sky over LA, and this is in the 40s. I don't want to misquote the wrong year. I believe 47. So I'm just like, okay, this is very specific. I don't know why this information is here, but I'm going to put a pin in this. At this time, this is when the Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef happens, and as he releases this album, Kendrick references the Battle of LA. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is this is some interesting information. At this moment, as I'm thinking in terms of this voyage that these characters on your right are going to embark on, I knew that they had to have a flag. And so at this moment is when I realized, like, okay, they have to have an American flag. So how my research works is like, well, I don't feel comfortable painting American flag. Why is that? Let's work through it. And so I have, Crispus Attucks, who was the first person to die in the War of Independence, right? So from there, that sort of gave me permission, as this is a Black Indigenous brother. So me as a Black Indigenous woman, I'm like, okay, I have permission because my relationship to America goes back really far. And I've done my genealogy, and what I discovered in my genealogy journey is that my family fought in every war in America, on both sides, including the Confederacy. And this is a Confederate soldier at the bottom. So I'm like, okay, I can work through this American flag thing. And then at the top, I have a painting that's in the Scottish Freemason Museum, that it is Benjamin Banneker and George Washington. So I'm like, okay, I'm okay. I can get through this American flag thing. And this is what the painting looks like. So I took all of that information and it transforms into this, okay? One of the things that I want to note is you have this brother Iceberg here who's, wearing his red, white, and blue, who's holding the flag. I wanted this painting to be like a literal epic, right? Like, this is a very essential part of the story. They're on their way to Antarctica. They're, each painting that I'm doing is a particular scene in a journey, or a particular stop in a journey. And I'm like, okay, if there's going to be UFOs that is reportedly there, those my cousins on the UFOs, right? So I put 1338, which is my grandmother's home address, that's on the UFO. And this piece, by the way, is called The Mothership Has Arrived. The ship is called Gloria, which is my grandmother's name. So it's implying both this mothership and the mothership. All of my sons are in this painting. So they arrived from the mothership because I carried them in my womb, right? So I wanted to emphasize the marching, the band, the music, because I was inspired by the movie Titanic. And one of my favorite parts of that film was, the band played on as the boat sank, right? So I'm like, if it's going to, the band plays when it sinks, the band is going to play when they arrive, right? And so you see Zendaya is holding a spaceship, and it just really implies like the imagination of the young, Naima, my niece, the only girl in the video, she's holding the rabbit, So, and finally, I want to talk about one more of my paintings, and I'm going to play a video as I'm showing a reference for this next painting. This is a song. This is an old 90s house. Early 90s. So I'll say probably earlier in the year it started going viral. It's started in Houston, I was going viral. So I was like, oh, look at this. Because Detroit is one of those cities where we so every song that's on the radio or hit, we have a line dance for. All right, y'all get that. Well, we can pass it. Okay. So that quite literally inspired this painting, which is called Follow Me. And I was really interested in this line dance going viral. And it was a meme going around like, okay, y'all, the world is burning, and meanwhile, Black folks is hustling. You know what I mean? Like that was the meme or the joke going around. And I found it quite poetic and quite beautiful, especially when you began listening to the words of the song. And so I thought, as I was creating this body of work, because the information is so terse and kind of out there, I wanted to have at least one painting rooted in like contemporary times, and I created this. So the subjects in this painting is my mother and my sister, who are dancers. And in terms of the storyline, I felt that this would be the part of the story when we land in Antarctica and we celebrating. And the song is Follow Me. And it's about this notion of being led to freedom. And, I thought it was just like really quite beautiful and poetic. And in this painting along the sides, the edges are dancing sunflowers, which is literally inspired by The Wiz, just some of the imagery from The Wiz, which features Motown. And so, this body of work of mine was really this sort of a love story to not only myself, my family, but really the idea of freedom, and using my young 18-year-old son who is, coming of age and still discovering the world, using him as like a protagonist, there's a book, when I think of Yakalo, my son, it's a book that I grew up reading called I Ain't a Hero, I'm Just a Sandwich, or something like that. I don't know if y'all heard of that book. But it was like, all of us have the potential to be a hero. And I find it quite poetic and beautiful to use my family and to use my sons as a guide to this notion of liberation, just for my hopes and aspirations for them, but also the next generation, especially with this being a teaching museum and, having access to the youth. I have so much hope. And every time I visit this space, I'm always inspired. And even though the world seems chaotic, I'm always reminded that we gonna be okay because y'all got us. You know what I mean? So this is my last slide. I think we've been good and we open for questions. Any questions? Oh, yes.
So the symbols in your work seem to mean like a lot of different things at once. Do you feel that there are maybe multiple stories throughout the show, or do you see them sort of all as uniting under one story with multiple levels?
Yeah, I think it's one story with multiple levels. The overarching theme is just the concept of it's the hero's journey and my interest in like just various archetypes, and with Iceberg being the archetype of the liberator, So you have that as of him being the liberator to his family or people, going to a physical location, but then you also have the sort of metaphoric, the metaphysical aspect of it, the invisible, which keep in mind, I always say that you have the complete product, this is what you see, but I wish I can really articulate what it takes to create this work, to work through these ideas is really, is quite grueling to be pretty transparent. And so while this is happening, which I don't get a chance to talk about in, throughout this year of making this body of work, like it took me a full year to create it. You have to imagine, like, I'm going through, like, the art market has had a shift, and I experienced a shift in my market for the first time in like 14 years. So I'm like dealing with that. I've had several deaths in the family. I don't let it affect me too much, but then you have like the political and social things that are unfolding. And so, and then just being an adult and a mother to 3 sons in this world is kind of a lot, right? So the work is essentially like a motif for like my struggle, like me being iceberg and getting over this cold and overcoming this fear. And each of the characters are wearing the Michael Jackson glitter glove, which it means like, just being badass and being fearless. I'm placing that glitter glove on myself, right? So the work is, although I'm using various characters, it's really all me. I can shift in any of these characters, including the liberator, because I'm essentially trying to liberate myself, right? So the work has multiple themes, right? Some that I can share, some that I can't share, but absolutely. And there are also things that are unfolding that I don't quite understand yet, because what I've discovered over the years of creating work is that the work itself is far more advanced than me. And I call it like knowing how to submit to the process, because I'm working intuitively. I'm if this was like ancient times or a different time period, I wouldn't be called an artist. I'll be like in my dungeon or whatever you want to, and I'll be in my studio sort of channeling. And so, so yeah, it has a multitude of layers. Yes.
I've seen like throughout what your art you've shown, there's this pattern that I've seen like with the dragons and they're like serpents.
Yes.
Animals. I see that really attractive.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the serpents and the dragons. Yeah, so I've been working with the serpent symbolism for the past like 6 or 7 years. And again, how my process works, it just pops up, it just comes in my mind, right? Like I'm not, I'm just trusting the process. And so what I discovered is a couple of things. One, the serpent, aka the dragon, is one of the oldest symbols in the world. In the Western world, it has a negative connotation, but in other parts of the world, it's venerated, right? And even here throughout the Americas, whether we talk about Quetzalcoatl or again, we have Serpent Mound in Ohio. I find it to be very, I've been drawn to it, I always talk about, even from a biblical perspective, the serpent has a negative connotation, but another perspective of it is like the serpent is a liberator. So I began working that out through my work. And also, when I started graduate school at Howard University, my dissertation was Medusa as an archetype, because I was fascinated with the archetype of the ugly mother, but that was my first introduction to like snakes or whatever. And so I've been working through it, and in my work, the snake transformed into the dragon. So when I moved back to Detroit in 2021, I left when I was 18 in 2000, come back in 21. I noticed that the architecture in Detroit has serpents and dragons, and quite a bit of I call it like the older world or the Roman Greco style architecture. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. What's the story of the Detroit Dragons? And as you know, an artist, a myth maker, I'm like, I don't know that story, so that means that I can create the narrative. And so, yeah, I find it quite inspiring, and I've been following the serpent, and it's led me to some very interesting spaces. I talk about the Detroit Institute of Arts, which has one of the most beautiful frescoes, I would argue, in the world, that was created by Diego Rivera. But one of the secrets of, I mean, it's, the docents talk about it, so it's not that much of a secret, is that throughout the mural, the fresco, is the serpent. Diego encoded it with the serpent. So we find artists, we find architects, designers, for a really long time has been using that. And for me, because it came naturally, I view it as me. I'm a part of a legacy of a very ancient legacy of creators that's using it as a guide. So, I hope that answer your question. Yes.
There are a lot of symbols involving your mother, like on the mothership or on the way or follow me.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there was any connection to either your connection with your own mother or mothership itself to
Mhm.
like myth making or
Yeah.
any other part of the journey.
Yeah. So part of it is just me being a mother and carrying 3 men in my womb. And I looked at it as, you know, any of you all who are motherhood or I don't know, ever thought about it, like just to have beings in your body like poking and kicking, like it's kind of a lot, right? And it's even as a mother, I'm like this, I'm literally like this is a mother, I'm a ship. You know, I'm carrying these kids, they're coming out of the womb, the black hole, you know, I mean, sorry, I just gotta speak really candid with you. And I find it very, you know, it's really profound when you think about it. So I'll say going through motherhood, of course, it encouraged me to view my relationship with my mother, the respect for my mother, who also carried 3 children. I'm just interested in motherships in general. So now we have to talk about like growing up listening to George Clinton in Parliament and thinking about the mothership. So this idea of the mothership has been in my subconscious for a really long time, just now kind of like unpacking it, including, again, I've had like UFO encounters. And so what it's for me is kind of like I'm exploring like what is this human body, like what is this, you know, like what is this thing right now that's coming more philosophical. Yeah, so I'm very much interested. So to answer your question, in part is from my experience with motherhood. And for the first time, I watched my niece Diamond, who I featured in the way. She gave birth to my niece Naima, and I watched Naima come out, and it was quite like I had PTSD for a while. But I'm also like, women are like we are amazing, and like this is some heavy stuff. Like you having a human emerge from the abyss. You know what I mean? Like where are you coming from? What? Like it could get really deep. So that's me. I'm unpacking it, you know. Yeah.
Oh, so as you might guess, I have a question about Professor John.
Yeah.
Here. So, I found throughout the way you worked that in there is just so, fascinating. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how in the context of the whole work, you
Yeah.
see him as maybe a symbol of liberation.
Absolutely.
Or goal or something like that. I wonder if you could just talk
Yeah.
about what you imagine him being in the context of this whole site.
For sure. So, for those of you who are familiar with or not familiar with the story of Prester John, it's also reports of him being like King David. Prester John is this figure that you find throughout history that is, I mean, it's rooted in mythos, and some would say that, you know, he was made up, etc. And I came across it and I'm just like, that's really cool because he was literally king of the planet. And if you look at some of his depictions, he was a black dude with locks. So I found that interesting. And so as I began embarking on this journey of like Antarctica, and I'm just reading all type of like weird texts, all type, and as you know, Percy John goes deep and he's all over the world. You know, encounters of him. So when I discovered him, the text of him being in Antarctica and this notion of him like waiting, you know, for his people to come, I was just like, okay, so this would be a great guide because as Sunrise said, like I've been following the myths. So anything that's myth, I'm like, I'm exploring it, including the boogeyman. You know what I mean? Like, well, let's unpack this boogeyman. So, he was just a perfect character to place in the story. And you know, I find it and you sent me quite a bit of text or we had conversations and I haven't even really dug down as far deep in the Prester John rabbit hole, but you know, I'm sure it's so many places that I can go. So he's just one of the characters that I found on the journey, you know. Yes.
We have a question from online from a Hamilton alumni,
Okay.
who is wowed by your use of color and composition, but he is wondering who are some of your artist inspirations?
Okay, that's great. So I'll speak musically as well. Musically is Alice Coltrane, who was the wife of John Coltrane. And I discovered that I didn't know initially that Alice is from Detroit. And her work is just so cosmic, out of this world. And so keep in mind while I'm creating this work, I have a very particular soundtrack that's informing some of those decisions. So I'm listening to the full Alice Coltrane catalog. I'm listening to Coltrane. What's interesting, right before I completed this body of work, I was inspired by the rapper West Side Gun, who is a Buffalo-based rapper. And I was describing to the students of the newspaper here, they just interviewed me. Like I was inspired by like his energy of, you know, I haven't listened to hip hop really in like the past 5 or 6 years, but I've recently, you know, became inspired by it through West Side Gun. So that's from a music perspective, fine art, because I've been in Detroit. I'm really inspired by my peers. That includes Mario Moore, that includes Tim Massey, Sidney James. We have some really exceptional artists there. I'm constantly my inspiration, because someone asked me, like, are you in a library a lot? Not quite. I've been in a library, but I'm studying architecture. Part of like my process, I'm really interested in like geography. I respond to geography. I feel really what's the word? I gravitate towards particular architectures or excuse me, buildings and mounds. I can drive anywhere and I can see them hidden in plain sight, and they speak to me. So I'm looking at that. Norman Rockwell. I've always been an illustrator. I've illustrated. So that's the other thing. I have the fine art side of me, and then I also have like a robust illustration career as well. And I grew up obsessed with Norman Rockwell. And I love Norman Rockwell, not just for, you know, his draftsmanship, but him just being an excellent storyteller. Him, Kerry James Marshall is another artist who I'm very much inspired by, like just really good storytelling. Nas, the rapper, really good story. Slick Rick, right? So, yeah, that's about it. Okay, yeah.
I'm taking a philosophy course, and there's this question of fiction that I've heard a lot. And from your art, you have like express your real life story and combine a lot of like the mythical world. So
Yeah.
and like trying to come up with you as a person or you as a life you've lived or something of that sort. So would you classify your work as fiction or as a demonstration of your lifetime?
Oh, that's a really great question. So I like to say that I'm gonna go with I'm a myth. And I can't even, the things that I experienced and observed growing up in Detroit, like, you know what, you wouldn't believe me. And I think that and me growing up in a family, like a really cool, unique, quirky family, throughout my whole life, I heard like really quote unquote crazy out of this world stories that like my mom, my uncle, my grandmother experienced. I remember I would stay over my grandmother's over the weekend and she'd be on the phone, like talking, gossiping with her girlfriend. And she would just be saying some like really interesting things, like, you know, I was in the mirror, then Big Mama, which is her mom, appeared in the mirror and we had a conversation. I'm like, girl, what? You know what I mean? Until I experienced it a year and a half ago, my husband and my son, we watched the sun open. And as crazy as that is, I like literally, the sun literally opened up and my husband and my son witnessed it. So the myth is a way to make sense of these things that I'm experiencing that I don't have like a great explanation of it, you know what I mean? And because we're talking about the work is also a metaphor of some of these like spiritual, metaphysical things that I'm working through. It's actually true, right? It's just that I'm using symbolism and mythos as a guide to understanding. So I like to be both. And according to Sunrise, the Black man is myth. And when you look in terms of history, how the history is mythologized. I don't know if that's a word, but it sounds good, mythologized. So even, and I'll give you an example of one, like California was founded by Queen Khalifa, this Black queen. And it's on one end, it's a myth. And it's like, is it a myth? I don't know. But it's a cool story, right? So I think that for me, the myth is I find in a lot of liberation there, even a concept of the boogeyman, and the monsters. Like I grew up, I don't watch them anymore, but I grew up watching horror stories. And we can say like, oh, Freddy Krueger, that's fake, right? But really, Freddy Krueger is an archetype or a symbol of those shadows that we typically run from. You know what I mean? And I always think in terms of Jason, you know, it's almost Halloween. And Jason could have been taken out a long time ago if everybody in the hood or the house was like, no, we about to take him out. But you're kind of conditioned, go run from the monster, run from the monster. And if you think about that as, again, allegory for all of us have those shadows or monsters that we're dealing with. So, you know, it's a very, and you know, I don't know, it's a slippery slope with mythos and reality. And I also think that just even the limitations with our language, us trying to unpack it. And also when you look at indigenous cultures, how mythos is used to understand and folklore is used to understand like the cosmos, the universe. I think no shade to like academia because I love it. This is where I thrive, right? But I think that a lot of things could be simplified if we use like folklore and mythos and understanding the world, you know what I mean? Not taking away from the science and the numbers, right? So I like to say I'm a bit of both. Okay, one more question. Okay. Oh, one more, okay, sorry.
Question. As you begin, as you were speaking about, you see the world through stories and then almost over time building all these different units and symbols that become more and more apparent in your work and this self-exploratory journey is making itself or revealing itself more and more in your journey. what would you recommend to young artists and art students?
Yeah.
How do we find our units?
Ooh, yeah, create the myth. Get into, right, there's a quote from Octavia Butler. And she says, you know, she had to write herself into history because she, you know, found herself absent. So she took the agency and the liberation to the agency to write herself into history or the future. So my goal is like look into the myth. And you know, I'm a big fan of like Neville Goddard. And I'm into like all the metaphysical stuff, but you know, it's something really powerful about the imagination. You know what I mean? And the imagination is a tool for liberation. And everything starts with an idea, you know, and the question is, which has been my sort of challenge is, do you have the gumption to imagine yourself as the liberator, as the hero, right? So that takes some imagination because it's like, you know, I ain't no hero, I'm just a peanut butter sandwich. But it's like, no, you can be that. And so, and even if you think about Superman or Spider-Man, whatever character or cartoons, that was somebody's myth, somebody's imagination that they have. So I would highly encourage that to use it as a tool.